Welcome everyone. Good morning. Welcome to this webinar.
Hi everyone. Good day to all of you from all of us. Okay, we are happy to have you here for an insight. All right, we are happy to have you here for an insightful webinar on the topic Talent Management and Scale, the Self-Driving Organization Using Career Pathways to Guide Your Workforce. Over the next 1 hour, our esteemed panel of guests will actually have a meaningful conversation. It'll be an engaging one where they'll share their best practices, latest trends, and their knowledge. So let's quickly walk through the agenda. That is, in this webinar, we will learn about the best practices to manage skills and create employee career pathways. And the learning points include how to shape an organization's career development plan, how to implement effective skill management and assessment process, analyzing employee skill gaps, and develop future leaders. And then there is a question answer round. Please use the question box to ask questions during and at the end of the webinar, as it makes the webinar more engaging and interactive one. So please feel free to ask the number of questions you want to. Go ahead and we'll dive deep into it. Okay, so let me introduce the distinguished panel now. We first have Jo Paul on our list. She's the Associate Director to Kearney, and about Doreen, and Dr. Amrinder Arora. He's the CEO and co-founder at ClearChart. Okay, let me introduce the first one, that is Jo Paul. She's this, as I said earlier, she's the Associate Director to Kearney. She has 20+ years in industry and consulting experience in financial services and CMT. Her knowledge is extensive as she holds key qualifications, that is of the Chartered Accountancy, Certified Financial Officer, and Professional Banker. Apart from that, her C-suite roles for local roles.
Sorry, go ahead.
Roles for local, regional, and global financial services. And not only this, she heads a group CFO, and her commitment to professional development is vast. She actively mentors, supports gender equality, and engages with professional organizations. But I have a key point over here. She not only, her leadership is not just limited to corporate sector, but she has philanthropic sector as well, as she chairs the Charities Aid, that is the Charities and the Foundation to South African Board. So we welcome you aboard, and we are all eager to hear your views on the career pathways and your like whatever your insights are to all the attendees tonight, and looking forward to hearing you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for taking out your precious time.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Naya.
Pleasure is all ours. Okay, this is the next panelist for tonight, that is Doreen.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to engaging you.
Yeah, her skill set is amazing, and it was one of the commendable one. She's a true cheerleader. I think with that skill set, you can win anybody's heart out. That is the training delivery, leadership development, stakeholder engagement. What more anybody wants than this? So her career revolves around sales, services, and people development, and she specializes in coaching and mentoring leaders during transitions between leadership levels or teams. When this is commendable, and offers training and speaking engagements on personal mastery and self-leadership. And if you allow me, we'd love to share your insights. Thank you for joining us.
I think Doreen might be just trying to turn the camera.
Thank you. I've joined now.
Wonderful. And Doreen, you can play with the camera as well. When I was joining, I had a little difficulty in turning that on as well, but I think hopefully now it's working fine.
Hopefully.
Perfect.
Doreen, thank you for joining, Doreen. I would like to repeat myself on one note. That is, I loved your skill set. And I mean, like it is, I think this is an impressive array. The delivery, the leadership development, and stakeholder engagement. So if you allow me, would love to have an engaging conversation with you. And thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, thank you for joining us and thank you for being there with us.
Thank you, Neha.
Next, we have Amrinder Arora. He's the co-founder and CEO to us, actually. So we are a good team. So he has 20 plus years in tech or software sector, spanning both the commercial and government sectors. He has launched and created products in use by millions today. His PhD in computer science, teaching excellence awards with 40 peer-reviewed publications and patents. He's the author to multiple textbooks in the field of algorithms and AI. And to us, you're a great mentor. We at ClearHR feel really good that you're there for us.
Oh, thank you, Neha. Thank you. It's my pleasure to actually organize this particular and have share the panel with Joanne and Doreen here. So thank you.
And I'll hand over to Amrinder. He'll outline everything for you guys. So over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's morning here in the US still, 11 o'clock, and of course, 5 p.m. South Africa time, 3 p.m. Ghana time. So wherever you're joining in from, welcome to you. If you would take a moment and just write down in the chat where you're joining from, that's always helpful for us to see where people are joining in from. And this is what we'll plan to cover today. It's a packed session. We'll try to move quickly. Thank you to Neha for getting us started right on time. So what we'll try to cover today is the HCM technology building blocks, what the main building blocks are of the software that allows some of the other optimizations to take place down the road. Those typically are things like job profiles, competency matrices, career pathways. And then we specifically want to deep dive into how do we use career pathways to analyze the employees' skill gaps, how do we mentor them, how do we enable them to become the next layer of leaders, and how do we allow them to drive the organization forward. That's why we call this particular webinar to be the self-driving organization. So the idea, and this comes from many managerial textbooks that kind of say that, hey, bring the right people on, make sure that they're thriving, and let the organization take its own road, right? So similarly from my perspective, similarly from any other leader's perspective, if the organization has the right people on, they're developing themselves, they will of course take the organization to great heights here. That's exactly what we want to be thinking about from today's webinar here. So one of the key questions that we want to get started with today is really who works at this organization. Can we articulate concisely what's our workforce look like? What is their skill sets? Where are their strengths? Where are their weaknesses? So that's the first key question that we look at. So one of the main things that we use to answer that question is the concept of job profile. And this simple construct is the bedrock of many other kinds of talent management practices that you are able to do. So we want to be able to consider, how do we define job profiles? They can also be called, there are different concepts that go close to it: job rank, job family. And then we want to make sure that all of our workforce is assigned to that one of those job profiles correctly. Now, many times in a large organization, you will see that different geographies have a similar job profile, but they have two different names. So there are key questions there to answer on when should we consider them the same, when should we differentiate. And some of those concepts are also cultural, because we have to know how do we go about making the job profiles the same here. So that'll be a key question for us to handle. Here's just a quick snapshot from the ClearHR default application here on where a job profile by the name of account executive is there. Now, of course, in ClearHR, you can create your own job profiles. The system provides you some guidance on how to define it, but at the same time, you can define anything you like here. You can say this is a job profile, this is a description, these are the responsibilities, and these are the requirements. Then the job profile can be assigned to the individual, as well as to open job positions. So you can work those things hand in hand here. Again, this is just a key construct here. Not so much I want to belabor the point. But here we do want to go into, before I start going to the panelists and asking them how do they use these constructs in their organization, here's just a quick poll question for you. Neha, if you could launch it, and then let's give the audience maybe about 30 seconds or so to answer it. so that we can continue the conversation forward here. So you should be seeing the poll, quick poll here. And the poll is a very simple one. It just simply says, how easy is it to find out the people with a certain job profile in your organization? And all the attendees can vote. The panelists, we cannot vote. We have to just watch. And maybe in 20 seconds or so, Neha will show up the results here. Now, we do understand that many of the attendees who simply use Clay HR, they would find it easy, but at the same time, if there are attendees who are not using Clay HR, we're interested in seeing how easy is it that they find in their system. Hopefully, well, no, I don't want to color the results here. Let me wait for the poll to complete here.
Give some 50 seconds more. Okay.
So if you are waiting please go ahead and answer it so that we can go ahead and take that. So yeah, Neha, I think we can go ahead and close the poll and show
the poll right now. And I'll share the results.
Okay, so of course, since many of the audience is using Clay HR, so they can probably find easily. But for people who are not using, they are also reporting that it's possible, but maybe just take some time to gather the information. But thankfully, nobody said it's not possible, or they don't use a concept, because that would be a little bit more work to kind of build the scenario here. Okay, great. So let's continue the conversation. At this point, I want to go into sorry, I'm just turning the.
1 second, Amrinder.
So while Neha connects the screen again here, hopefully you can see my screen again in a moment.
One second, it's not hiding it up.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So let me go ahead and share the screen here. So that's was our poll question. So before I go on to the next key question here, I just want to turn to you here. First of all, maybe Joanne, I'll start with you. Joanne, this concept of job profile, as easy and as powerful as it is, we do see from our customers, especially the multinational ones, that sometimes it is really fraught with challenges. People have the same exact job profile in a different geography. Somebody might be doing the same work in South Africa, but somebody might be doing the same work in Nigeria, but they have different job profile names for it. And they often find it very, very, very difficult to say, hey, as a global organization, we're actually all doing the same work. Do you find that that's a challenge? And wherever you have seen it, how have you best come across it to counter it?
I think, Amrinder, first of all, welcome everybody. Good to be on the call, and thank you for the opportunity, and pleasure to share the stage with you as well, Doreen, in that space. I think the understanding of job description and job profile is also a little bit more complex. So, what it is described at versus what you actually do and what is required for the role. What we have seen and what I have experienced in my different roles across financial services, for example, is that the different geographies have different weight. From a title perspective, which is the description, is where the difference often lies. We've had to do quite a bit of work from an organizational structure and understanding of what is expected of you based on the actual job profile. So that talks to, outside of the title, what your roles and responsibilities are, the expectations and qualifications, and how you deliver that. That exercise, if I had to go back nearly 2 decades when we started it depended on the maturity of the market. Some individuals had not had their role profiles updated, but been in the organization for a number of years, and as a consequence had been promoted, but not necessarily aligned with what their job profile was. In other instances, new jobs had been created, or changes in operating models and business models required different roles, etc., and there wasn't necessarily consistency. So the first port of call was to make sure that the job profiles described were consistent. Title was then jurisdiction specific. However, the content of what that meant and the expectation in a global organization had to be aligned. So that required the frontline teams together with the support function, partnership functions, in my case, in the finance world, working closely with human capital to align with what the expectation was, what that meant for a different job grade by jurisdiction. And in some smaller countries, we had to, because we had smaller teams, combine what that meant to make it fit for purpose. So we had a global overarching framework. Local relevance was important in terms of how we structured it. And then the opportunity to say, well, what was expected of you and how did you delve into support with the central team? I think it's been quite a journey. The jurisdictional nuances had implications for the delegation of authority in the system, what you could and were mandated to do. That had implications for the expectations from an external perspective, how clients saw your role and what that meant, especially in terms of what mandate or level of seniority may have meant, and then what that meant in terms of our own back-end system around workflows. So it did touch on every element outside of just career progression, potentially having parallel streams for growth, etc. It had an external lens, an internal consistency requirement for parity around the role, what that meant for reward, what that meant for performance metrics, and then what that looked like in terms of how your peers would assess you. So for me, it's been a journey, definitely been improved over time.
And while Joanne, you were talking, I just brought up the screen as well on what it looks like in ClayHR, but I think the points that you say are all really valid. I think are really and really spot on. I especially like the point that you said you have to kind of work in the context of that organization, specifically of the local geography, to see what exactly is expected by the organization in that particular job profile from the individual. I think if that can be articulated in sort of in a universal language, a lot of these problems will become more manageable, because then they can say, hey, that's the same job profile here, that's the same job profile here, even if translated across different languages of the region, they might have a different name, but essentially it's still the same thing under the hood. So I think that's very helpful.
Thank you.
I think, Doreen, before I come to you for the question, I just want to maybe bring in the next key question here already, so I can then ask you a little bit about that. So next key question, this is the key question number 2 here. I want to bring forth to the audience here is, where are the people who work here? Essentially, where are they going? Where will they be in X months, in X years, etc.? Where will they be? And by that, we really are talking about career planning, career pathing here, career ladders. So how do we define the career pathways? How do we visualize the roadmaps? How do we understand the promotions, lateral results, etc.? And again, like the previous question, this question actually also has quite a bit of organizational detail to it. As an example, again, I'll just show some of the basic capability as it looks in the software, but beyond the software, there are other questions which I want to pose to the panelists here. So this is just a career pathway. It shows I think if it's easier to see in the slide, I can show it here. Otherwise, if it's easier to see in the application here. So this is the career pathway name, the career pathway description, as well as these are the different steps as the person can become from this particular. Now this, because of this particular audience, it may actually be very, very, very easy one for people to see that, okay, somebody can go from, they can change their career from being a recruiter to a manager to a business partner to something like a directorship, or maybe they might have other layers in between. But depending upon whatever you have, this is typically what a career pathway or career ladder would look like. Now, once you have the career pathway, though, you can of course see it in the context of one employee. You can say, okay, for this person, where they are, where they're going next. So this person is a director of HR, but they are going to, they're trying to be at the CHR or the next level. And the whole vision is that the employees can see where their career is going, and if they want to make some changes to it, how they can see that. Now, specifically, let me go back and I'll go to the next screen again. Is once the employee says that, hey, once a team member says that this is where I am, this is where I'm going, the logical next question then becomes, how do I get there? Many times we want to clarify to the team member that it's not merely the passage of time, that gets a person from here to here. It's not a question of sitting in the job for 3 years. Rather, it's a question of getting all the skills and getting all the well-rounded knowledge to take us there. Whether it's a question of 6 months or it's a question of a year, that's a separate matter. But the whole question is around the capability set that we need to develop. Sorry. So, and this kind of shows the employee saying, hey, this is my capability. This is my capability gap on where exactly I am and where do I need to get there. Now, in many cases, this may not be that well measured at that point, but still the concept of gap is there. And let me pause here and Doreen, come to you with the question here before we start talking about the career pathway design, just from the gap perspective here. Do you find that this is a mechanism, valid mechanism, which serves as a key motivational concept for the employees? Or if you change it, how do you change it in your organizations to make it more effective?
Thank you, Amrinda. And Joe, it's nice to be on the platform with you. Good afternoon to everyone from Ghana. So, Amrinda, I guess it differs from just as we are very different as individuals, it would differ from employee to employee. But from an organizational perspective, I would say it's great for the organization to be able to show vividly what the steps for your progression look like. But you'd have people who would not want to be boxed into you move from one level to the other, who enjoy using their skill set in another job family and acquiring the skill set in that space, and then being able to build some kind of lattice for themselves over a period. So I think from an organizational perspective, it's great to have a career pathway. It's a good value proposition for the employer, but from the individual perspective, from the staff perspective, or from what you want to achieve with your career over a period, it's good to know that you have options. And if I use my life as an example, I haven't had the progression from one ladder to another in the same job family. I have selected where to take my skill set over a period. And so I've just used the concept of credibility transfer, taking my skills and selling them in different job families over a period. And so I'm able to serve across different organizations over the 20-year span of my work life. So great for the organization, but the employee needs to take a decision on what they want for themselves as well.
Thank you for the... Please. Go ahead, Joanne.
Amrinda, I wonder if we could build on that with Doreen, because I think to your point on options, that's important. If you have a lattice or dual or multiple career paths, it gives you a few things. It gives the individual, from an empowerment perspective, a view of what it could look like and take to get to various scenarios and fill the skills bucket that you talked to, Doreen. But that flexibility impacts things like retention, impacts experience and expertise development. And what we found in my space as a golden thread is that some statistics at one point said that half the world is in a situation of involuntary slavery. So they're where they are, not necessarily by choice. If you create a space where there is choice, then that dynamic around culture, what it means to thrive, because you can give discretionary effort, is key. And I think this visual, transparent tool is a great example of what can be done there. So in my own experience, I've spent time in the finance function, segued into HR, which set me up very deliberately for consulting. But I don't think it was necessarily over a 20, 25-year period now, always by design. And so this opportunity around being far more deliberate, I think, in your career planning, your decisions, your choices as an individual, and having ownership as well as a line manager for support, and a tool that shows you that is a real asset in terms of being able to be a lot more deliberate about how you gather those skills that actually round out who you are and what you could contribute to various organizations across job families. And I think that's where there's real benefit in terms of if individuals have choice in how they are empowered, and you do need to be actively involved in your career planning, this level of transparency around what it could be, I think, shifts the dial from a staff engagement perspective, productivity perspective, and those kinds of elements.
Got it. So there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, quite a few different things I think both of you have said. I think it's probably worth a little bit further discussion into that. Doreen, like you touched upon the fact that first of all, it really differs from employee to employee. Maybe from an organization's perspective, that's great, you know, but from an employee's perspective, they may think of this as they may think of this as great motivator, but they may also think of it as the word that you used was boxing them in, saying that, hey, I don't want to be this thing. So having a career pathway that maybe shows them, and I'm just trying to find another example that kind of shows a little bit more of like just a little bit. So it does not necessarily have to be this top down, but rather saying, hey, you have many different choices. You having those career pathways may actually be, even if it adds a little bit of a complexity. Let me see if this is the one that has some more of those different examples here. Not quite. But maybe that example would basically give you saying that, hey, person can essentially go from here, can take two different routes here, maybe take 3 different routes here. We see that across some of the retail sales organizations where people can grow in many different ways. So that's very interesting. So do you see, Doreen, that in a sense, giving them that, while it can add the complexity, but it gives them the more comfort saying, hey, I can choose my path? Is that what you see?
That's what I am speaking to. It's given choice to the different or the diverse teams within the organization, so that individuals see that yes, there are different options for me, and I can make a choice, and I can grow in the space. You know, right. So it's, if I choose to go to this direction, there's still an option for me in this organization. But if I choose to go through another route, there's also an option for me in this organization. Instead of the straight route where I move from level 1 to a level 2, and I'm being groomed for a CHRO in future. I want to find myself in the product development space. What do I need to get there? You know, and so having the options, I think, is a fantastic value proposition for the employer. And seeing it as visual, as you presented it on Clay, even makes it more appealing.
Right. And here I'm just showing a slide. Go ahead, Joanne.
I was just agreeing and wanted to add that it's empowering for the individual, but I think as a line manager, to be able to have a view of what next could look like is also, from a coaching, mentoring, apprenticeship in action even, I think the visual, depiction allows you to have those earlier conversations for an individual trying to work out where they want to go, an organization trying to marry up what it needs with a talent pool that is diverse, or that has great specialization expertise, but could shift into a more, or less transactional or more transformative role. I think the benefit is for the organization, for the line manager or those leading people, and then for the individuals themselves. So it's a 3-pronged proposition, I think, that adds value and very nicely depicted here.
So I think there, to cover that particular opportunity, that maybe, let's suppose that the organization didn't even think of a career ladder, but I just want to carve my own journey here. So if I want to just explore, so if I just change the screens here a little bit, so I'm logged in here as Ellen herself, and if Ellen wants to say, hey, I want to be sure, maybe you are telling me that my next step is a CHRO, but I don't really want to be. I want to go into brand management, and maybe I don't have the right skills for that yet, but I want to be the brand manager, and I want that to be my primary. At least she has the capability to do that. At least she should be able to say, hey, this is where I'm going. You may be trying to box me into saying, hey, because I'm director of HR and I need to go into CHRO, but I'm just saying that, hey, this is my brand manager, this is my next step here. I think that's perfectly fine, that this is where you need to go, and then you may have to get the skills to get there, as well as the organization can then segue very nicely into the succession planning to say, hey, this person is not trying to become the next person we thought, rather we may have to pull that from another person, from another resource, but this is where this person is going, and if that's where this person is going to be successful and happy, then I think that's a great value for the organization as well. Joanne, there's another thing that you used here which I thought I really enjoyed, and I'm curious on you said that we are all in, many of us are in inadvertent slavery. Is that what you meant to say, that people just allow themselves to somebody else to drive their career path for them? Is that what you meant to say?
Well, a couple of things. It's not just about someone else driving it for you. It's about where you are given some of your circumstance. It might be a life choice circumstance in terms of where you are there. It might be what's available in the market. It might be, to your point on the career path planning, that when you've actually started to look at what you are passionate about or would like to do, brand manager, for example, if you've gone so far down the route, the question around whether to restart or to pivot is quite a big one. So if you, at the beginning of your career or at any key junction, have the opportunity to consider what could an alternative route be to where I want to go, then I think you're far more empowered around what's next. It's interesting when you have more of these courageous conversations. I think you'd want to be able to say to your line manager, actually, that's where I'd like to go next. How do I get there? Or is there an opportunity in the role where I've got developed expertise? And take me, for example, in the finance space, in one of my propositions, we had a really fantastic, phenomenal head of finance, wanted to ultimately shift into being a CEO or COO, hadn't had frontline experience. So shifted from there into a broader team leadership space, looking after a shared service center that serviced a region. Then went from there to look after a product portfolio, direct linked to the front line, understanding how the back office operations worked. Then went segue from there back into a group finance role, then into a COO role, and now is a CEO and has been in 2 different African countries over the past 5 years. So I think it's about being able to say, how do you collect the skills over time so that you don't find yourself in a space where you feel, I can't move. And I think tools like this encourage conversation, because often that feeling of being trapped is not necessarily accurate. It is how you experience it and your perception, but there is an opportunity to look at what different could mean.
So you're absolutely right that this conversation is significantly about courage, because it may not be about somebody else telling me this, but I can myself do this calculation that, hey, I'm already here. I'm 70%, I have a 70% skill match with my next role. So if I just go there, it's relatively easy for me, versus if I were to pivot, like you said, it's a more difficult conversation. But having the HR, giving the HR those tools and the bandwidth to be able to have that courageous conversation, I think this is what it's all about. This is what this is all about.
I also think if you, maybe in your feedback here, I was saying in an organization, if we know you, the courageous conversation is one thing. The willingness for us to take a risk on you is so much bigger if you've been through a journey with the organization, because if you're 70% and you need to do the pivot, we'll guide you and coach you because you've got a track record, credibility, mentors, sponsors, presence in the organization. So I think that's where this speaks to flexibility, retention, and maybe over to Doreen around your optionality pieces. And the clear line of sight, I think, is quite remarkable actually in the tool.
Yeah, and thank you, Joanne, for that. But Joanne mentioned very clearly the role of the line manager in this as well. Really important. I often emphasize to all line managers that all line managers or leaders are HR people first. So although HR sets out the structure or the framework that enables this, there's a lot that lies on the shoulders of the line manager in conversations with their direct reports around this, so that it's not situated as an HR conversation, but it's one that is decentralized across the organization for leaders and their direct reports on what next for you and what's available in the space. So thanks, Joanne, for mentioning that.
I mean, I must say, I'm really in awe of all the different things I'm hearing and learning, because that's the key value to the attendees today, is the concepts that both of you are explaining and articulating so well, that that's really what the conversation is. It's less about the tool. It's more about, like you said, Doreen, that the line managers are ultimately driving the organization's culture in a way, and that's where the HR needs to have the line managers working with them closely so that they can spread the message to their team members saying, hey, let's have that conversation with you. Let's make sure you have the right flexibility to take your career in a direction that would make you successful and happy, and that would ultimately have much more kind of an employee retention, much more than a, there's always at least in the US, there's always a thing, much more than a foosball table will do. So that's really what this is about. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go just a little bit further into the conversation, and again, I want to come back to listen to how you approach this thing here. So one of the things we see, and this is a relatively, I would call it a little easier on the HR here, but there's a good technology capability available these days. For example, in Clay HR, that you can have, if you have the tenure history. So if you don't have the career pathways designed, rather than having a very long winding conversation about what the career pathways should look like, simply from the previous tenure history, you can simply upload it. Clay HR will come up with the right pathways that you can then freely edit and critique. That then makes it a good starting point here. So saves a lot of time up front. The HR can do that, and that's just a little bit of an easy question for the HR to get started with. So before I come back to the questions, I just want to see if this poll question, we can take this poll question here. Let me go ahead and launch this, or I think, yeah, no, Neha, you can please go ahead and launch that. So let's kind of, just in interest of time here, please, as soon as you see the question, go ahead and please answer it. It says, in my organization, all career pathways are known. So essentially they're saying, yes, they're easily available in the HCM, in Clay HR, or something like that. But some other organizations, this is interesting, and I see some people are already answering. 30% people have already answered. Thank you very much for doing that quickly. Doreen and Joanne, I'll share maybe somewhat of a funny story here. So I was working with a customer, this was about a month ago, and they shared they have not yet activated the career pathways module. They're using, probably some of the others still using the employee records and some of the more capacity building. And I asked them, I said, oh, the career pathways, I said, how do you currently do that? They said, oh, yeah, it's very easy. I said, how does it do that? So essentially they have PDF files in their SharePoint, and that's where the career pathways are. And I was relatively surprised that from the HR leader's perspective, that was considered sufficient. They were saying, oh, that's okay. And we change that once every couple of years. But I was thinking that, the times are moving so fast that there's so much capability available that I don't think anybody should really be depending on PDF files or the career pathways these days. But I do understand that organizations have to move at their own pace. So just wanted to share that funny story. I'm sure you have come across as well at some places like that.
I think maybe, Amrinda, also an equally anecdotal pieces where roles haven't been replaced for a long time, or we see a change in structural automation, and we ask for the original, role profile. Some of those haven't been touched either. So to your point, it's almost been a function of when it was required, as opposed to when we review the strategy, we look at the target operating model and business model, we look at org structures. We don't necessarily always do it holistically for the whole organization. And sometimes the ability to see that transparency is impacted by what's being focused on, as opposed to the full organization being regularly updated.
And that, I think, is kind of reflected in these poll results as well, Joanne. I think that's exactly what you're saying, right? That only some people know the pathways, other people have not been, either they have not been designed for them, or at least they have not been shared with them. So I just wanted to see, Doreen, if you had a similar experience there as well around that. I want to continue then.
In terms of people, just a few people knowing the career pathway, sometimes in some places you'd find that some roles come up as the organization goes through the various reorganization processes. And like Joanne mentioned, sometimes it's after you've defined what it is that this is about and how it impacts the org structure, we probably never go further to say, okay, now if these new rules have come up to enable us achieve what we want to achieve, what happens for these rules? What are the options for these rules? So I've been in a scenario where after a point, through the reorganization conversation, people now started asking, the employees themselves started asking, what's next in line for a role like this? And that's when now the framework, now HR needed to sit back and have a conversation with business leaders to say, actually, yes, this should have happened from the start, but now it didn't happen. So let's have a corrective measure in place. This is a new direction based on the new context of our industry. That's what the organization has chosen to do. This rule, I think it was about 3 new rules were created. What's the next line for these rules and for the employees in these rules? And so it was initially a brainstorming conversation between the HR team and then the business leaders, but a career pathway was carved for the people who were recruited in that role, because then it's a large organization and you want to give people the option or choice and flexibility should they decide to join and then build a career in that space.
And maybe, Amrinda, to build on that, is as part of that organizational restructure, whether it's to optimize or whether it's an asset exercise and you're unbundling, or whether you're acquiring and it's an integration, what we have seen, what I've seen in my experience has happened, is we then convened a project team, co-created some of the pieces specifically, for example, in an integration, had allocated or had selected talent to operate in those roles, which then morphed into a day job over time. And those role profiles were never created, but rather just the job title or description. And so there are a number of spaces, just as a function of business as usual, continuing, that actually, to some extent, technology like this or the software that's available will help from a good governance perspective, that we create some structure and a repository around it so there's sustainability. We understand the logic of why those roles initially were created. We understand, to Doreen's point, what next could look like. And we can also understand the gaps they've possibly left behind that potentially were not required to be filled based on some change, whether that's technology and automation, or an integration and combining roles, or change in regulatory environment, which has seen roles split. So there are a number of ways, and I think often the opportunity to have a transparent lens of what the role profiles looked like, married up and matched to an org chart and structure at level 1, 2, and 3, allows you to pick up when there's anomalies, and to maybe be a lot more to ensure we're a lot more up to date on what this could look like.
Understood. I think that's very, very helpful. Let me go ahead and get the next set of questions here. And by the way, we'll also have as attendees, you can please ask any questions. We already have quite a few questions in the question box here, but if you have not yet asked your question, go ahead and feel free to ask it. We will be starting to take questions in a few minutes here while we cover this last segment here. The last segment here, what we want to cover here is the key question number 3, which is try to answer who knows what and what level in the organization. So again, this is essentially we're talking about here is a method for analyzing employees' skill gaps, create skill assessment frameworks, have some mechanism to be able to assess the employee competencies, think about their weaknesses, think about learning opportunities, automatically assign that, and be able to look at that at a slightly higher level as well, not just at an employee level, but at a higher level as well. So here what we're just going to quickly talking about is there's a visualization framework called the skill matrix. You can create as many skill matrix views as you like, typically around, hey, I want to look at this particular department and I want to see their corresponding competencies, and just say here where everybody's skill lies here. And if somebody has a little bit of a skill gap, you can easily highlight it and do that here in your system, as opposed to doing that in some kind of a tedious spreadsheet. Do that inside the system so that the system can keep that skill matrix up to date. One of the big problems we normally hear about the skill matrices, especially when they're done in spreadsheets, etc., that they are kind of like set and forget. You spend a lot of time doing that, but then as soon as you do them, as soon as you finish working on them, they're already out of date, because we're always changing. So one of the main outcomes that the customers can achieve within Clay HR is that you define your skill matrix, but then set up the right automations in place. So when an employee completes a performance review, or they complete a goal, or they complete a project assignment, or they complete they receive a feedback, or they give a feedback, or they receive some kind of praise from somebody, the system can automatically keep it up to date using the mechanisms and the parameters that you describe. So that makes the skill matrix not a set and forget kind of artifact, but rather a live and breathing kind of artifact here, which is a much more useful kind of thing here. So you can set it to auto calculate and don't have to kind of keep it fresh at all times here. So this is just many different ways that you can do that, and you can assess. Of course, you can put the manual assessments, still allow the manual assessments, allow the managerial assessments, etc. You can still do that, but the whole idea is to do that. And once, of course, those matrices, that gaps are defined, then to fill those skill gaps and to develop the leaders, you can automatically assign the learnings. You can say, hey, this is where you can greatly benefit from this learning here, and that introduces and you can also introduce some kind of specific project assignments or work pathing opportunities, kind of where they would pick up those skills here. So that's just a little bit of the backdrop of this capability set. And let me go to the panelists and see where exactly they see the capabilities around these three quick questions. But before we do that, here we have a very quick question here. So if you could please take 30 seconds to answer this thing here. The polling question here is simply, do you use skill matrices? Just go ahead and choose one of these options here. And Neha, if you could go ahead and launch the poll, and let's give the attendees maybe just 30 seconds here just to quickly answer it, so we can spend more time with our panelists here. So the polling question is on. Okay, people have already voting. So just again, which do you simply use the skill matrices? A little bit. Okay, we've crossed the 40% threshold. People are voting very quickly. And let's take the last 10 seconds here. And the last 5 seconds here. So if you have not yet answered, please go ahead and take that. We can do that. 3, 2, and 1. Okay, go ahead and Neha, you can share the results so we can go back to the, again, Doreen, Joanne, I don't know if you find these results to be, thankfully nobody's calling it something else. So people are not using it. So either they don't use it, which is fine. It's almost the same number of people who don't use it, but they use it, but it's not. And then of course, with this, the webinar series sometimes is outsized number of Clay HR users. So of course they would be using it heavily. But I don't know if you find those surprising, Doreen and Joanne.
Not surprising.
Not surprising.
Not at all, yeah.
Great. So let's then, and I want to go back to you, to the panelists here. So what do you see? Like, how do you see this specifically about this particular capability around skill matrix? If you have found a way that actually works very effectively for you, but then really, I'm also interested in seeing how do you really put it all together, because there are capabilities in the systems, but from your overall system, executive management perspective, how do you put it all together? What are some of the things that you have seen work very, very, very well?
I think I would start from first, again, defining the role, what skills, what technical competencies are required. I would go to what leadership competencies are required to perform this role. And then if there are any behavioral competencies that are required in the organization to help the achievement of the role, I would be clear in defining those to form a kind of framework that enables the individual know the various levels at which these competencies can be performed or lived. And then I would take it a step further to define what playing it at, say, a level 1 looks like, or delivering it at a level 4 looks like. And all of this, after they've been defined, I would want to equip leaders within the organization to own the process, so that they can have those conversations with their team members on what level is required to deliver effectively at a particular role. And where there's a gap, then the various development opportunities from training, coaching, mentoring, from job rotations, for projects, handling projects, for buddying people in another department, but employing all the development tools that are available within the organization to make it happen for the individual to move from one level to the other. Bearing in mind that actually hands-on performance in a particular role plays a big part of that development process for the individual, and not just training or putting them in a classroom to learn something new, but actually hands-on experience counts for the training as well. So that would be the framework that I would use. I'm curious to know how Joanne would approach this as well.
Thanks, Doreen, and thank you. I think Merinda again for setting the scene. We've been quite deliberate about setting out career paths from a planning side. So from a system perspective, if you look at a couple of things. One, it's how you set your goals, understanding where you are based on your job profile. So we have profiles that say what it means to be at your current level and what success and performance looks like against the various skills relevant to that role. Behavioral competency requirements, there's a contribution to firm building, to the broader culture, D&I, but very specific elements from a whole holistic perspective for our employees or our consultants and our specialist areas and management services. So it's bespoke to where you are at the moment. Then you've got clear line of sight of what that career path could look like for each of those. So if you're in partner services, so management support, if you are in a specialist role, if you're in a consulting role, for example, or frontline, there's very distinct levels by job name, or by description, and then by profile with specific skills. And the actual performance evaluation that looks at the competencies that are assessed, then have a view on the system that says, what does at current mean when you're doing your day job? What does at next mean in terms of the transition to a next role in that particular space, so that you can give very specific examples of what your goals and objectives are based on where you'd like to go next. Then get assessed with clear examples of what's gone well to say, yes, you meet at current, actually you've exceeded your at next. And then what we call even better if, as opposed to development areas. So those are what the growth opportunities can be. For each of those pieces, we have everyone has a mentor, a sponsor in terms of grooming and growing their particular career path. The system has clear line of sight of what the competencies are, your assessment against competencies, and a career path plan. What it doesn't have, and what I liked about what you presented, was how you integrate all the feedback. So we've got NFS as a system to give feedback on individuals if you've experienced apprenticeship in action or you've learned something from them. So it's a bottom-up view. We have a 360-degree review tool. We've got a top-down piece in terms of peer-to-peer assessment, but we collate that all still to a large degree manually. So you input the outcomes of those components as opposed to having a system that fully integrates all of it. So we've got the ingredients, so to speak, in terms of speaking to what good practice and best practice would look like, fit for purpose for each office and for jurisdiction and each country. But what is important is the ability to now synthesize that more readily. And I think what you've got here is that opportunity. And we definitely start with the basics. Also, some skills, if I think about, we call them human skills, not soft skills, because they're not soft, they're difficult to embed and to learn, but they're important, is those particular skills have a different shading. So there is an element around, what it means in terms of apprenticeship in action at certain levels, around coaching, mentoring versus when you're starting out and you're learning and it's peer-to-peer. So we also grade what those relevant competencies are based on where you are in your career trajectory and where you want to get to, so that we do it for technical requirements, for specific KPIs within a pillar or specialist area, and then for what we would call our, rounded out softer skills.
And I have heard that similarly, I think like just you mentioned, Joanne, that it is not soft skills. Those are, I've heard a different term for them earlier called pivotal skills, because they help you really pivot. So I agree with that. They're not easy. And I think Joanne,
so
go ahead.
Sorry, carry on, Brenda.
Well, I was just going to say that this is kind of, I think, what you were just talking about, that the essentially just allow the skills to be updated based on, allow the people to self-report, allow that to be allow some ad hoc updates, but allow performance reviews, allow feedback / kudos / learnings to update the skill levels. And again, you can do some more, configuration on how much exactly do you allow that to happen. But again, you can choose the formula, etc. But I think this is the part that you were referring to, and I agree that this is kind of makes it very easy that your skill matrix, whether you're looking at in the context of a person, or you're looking at your overall, one particular view here, or changing, that makes it quite easy to make sure that the skill matrix is up to date.
And we apply that to performance measurement, and we apply it for consideration in promotions, because in some skills there are non-negotiables. You need to have delivered at that level. For others, you can actually round out your skill in your next role, as opposed to necessarily having them all right now. So I think that's been quite important from a line of transparency, and clear coaching proposition around how do we invest in you in your next role, and what is required versus what is part of a growth proposition.
So there are quite a few questions. I want to go to those questions, but again, these are some common questions we hear. Before I go to those questions, and I think I understand that we don't have a whole lot of time to go through many questions here, but very quickly though, Joanne, do you have some big level initiatives that you have seen work very well that you would like to share with the audience here?
When you say big level initiatives, what we've done, I suppose we've seen performance management being driven. It's not just, I think culture is not top down or bottom up, it's almost outside in. And so we've been very deliberate about the training and awareness in terms of performance management or career path planning, so that individuals could have courageous conversations and creating the right kind of safe environment, in the sense that nothing is career limiting. Wanting to understand what the options are is a good and better conversation than coming through to feel that I'm boxed in and I have no options and where to next. So a lot of our engagement has been about awareness training. We've also got a mentorship program where we mentor individuals that are not in our line or not on our projects. And so how that works is you would get your performance appraisal from the projects you've been on. We would work towards getting feedback. So you would have a self-assessment, an assessment by the team you worked with or the individual you worked for. We would then gather evidence to substantiate how you've been assessed, what they've said, understand how we celebrate what you've done well and do more of that, because that's a strength. What it is that is an ever better if, and how do you do that differently next time, and get to a rounded out process in terms of how you carve out your next move. So I think the mentorship becomes a broader proposition versus just in your practice area or in your specific area of focus, and as a consequence, very robust conversations with individuals, good conversations around what support means, different lens when it's sponsorship. This is specifically mentorship from a career perspective, where it's not necessarily within your direct line, because my perspective on optionality without the risk of actually losing a great resource to a different function is quite different in the spaces. And so we've seen that work interestingly. We've also done some reverse mentorship, which has challenged the status quo on what competencies are required by when, and as technology gets enhanced, what type of skills have to be built up. And I think about written communication as one, for example, and how heavily that was weighted and how that's shifted over time, or the technical expertise in accounting from an IFRS standard perspective. And now we've got technical teams and you can research and apply, and actually it's coded in the system to a large degree. So a lot of those roles have shifted. So our big ticket items have been the mentorship pool outside of your direct line, the communication and awareness around that in terms of training, and the fact that actually the job shift as technology catches up, and the weighting and the ability to challenge that weighting through a reverse mentorship process and apprenticeship and action courses.
So very interesting thing to what you just described here, and I'll share what one of the customers did. You called it inside our reverse skill. I'll mention what one of the customers did, and I was so, I'm always amazed by the innovative nature that people use the platform for in their way. So they did a survey. They basically assigned no skills to any job profiles. They assigned there are no skills in there, no assigned to a profile, so therefore no skills gaps show up in the. Rather, when they did a performance review, they did survey of, hey, you just finished a performance review, you've just taken this thing, and say, which skills do you think were needed for you to do this job well? And then And so they created a skill gallery, did not assign anything, asked the people which skills, and then they did a further relation of how many people who had done well in their performance review, what skills they said were important versus all the people who did well and who not well, and they created those skills into the job profile with different weightages. So I said, okay, if you and I was like, oh, you know,
But that's a great way
of,
to update them, right? That's the way you update your job profile. So you don't even have to be as extreme as nothing. And we look at that in terms of a change in technology, change in environment from an industry perspective, what our peers might be doing. And I love that the technology allows you to then say, what did you need for the role versus what we believe you would have needed? And then that will almost recalibrate what is required. So you have a living document that individuals contribute to. And in that system, you often find out that poor performance is almost weeded out because the peer-to-peer coaching and the apprenticeship becomes part of how you do your job to complete what was required, as opposed to testing that you did, you know, what people were assessing you for. I really like that example.
I just want to digress for one moment just to answer one question from the audience, and then because we are just at time here, most common question I've heard from the audience, which is always the case, is that are we going to get the slides? Yes, please. You will get the slides at the end. So so do not worry about that, and you'll get the recording. And Neha will also share all the LinkedIn contact information for us. So if we do not get through your questions, you'll just have that. You can always welcome the conversation over LinkedIn. Secondly, just going back to the topic at hand, though, one question from the audience, I think this is very, very useful. This is from Sarah or from Kevin Ose? It's from Ose, sorry. And Shalina, yeah, your question was about the slides. You will receive those. So about the Sarah's question here is that sometimes there is just no vertical growth opportunity. There's only horizontal or diagonal growth opportunity. How do you see the organizations encouraging the employees? And after that, we'll take one more question so we can finish still relatively on time here. If you could take that question, Joanne, Doreen, whoever wants to field it.
I've done a lot of talking. I saw Doreen nod vigorously. I'm happy to bolt onto it because I think my own career is one of those diagonals, but I think you alluded to it earlier, Doreen. So maybe share your story and then I'll touch base on mine.
All right, and thank you for that. So if you ask me, the principles are the same. So even if it were still horizontal, or if it were it's not vertical anymore, it's horizontal, sometimes you actually do need to take a shift backwards so you can move to another role to learn certain skills or to understand what it is that happens in that particular space. The framework remains the same. First, let's have an understanding of what it means to do well in that role. What skill sets are required? What are the competencies, and at what level should I be demonstrating them to grow in this or to move into that option that's available? So I would say, if you ask me, same principle. Let's understand what's available. Let's understand what it takes to succeed in them, and let's make the options available to create that flexibility within the organization for the employees.
And maybe to build on that, and I agree with you, I think it's the framework works if it's well structured. What we've also seen happen, and maybe even more so post-COVID, is the opportunity to say, yes, possibly in the jurisdiction you're in or the office, etc., it's only horizontal or diagonal, but the world is a smaller place. The opportunity to have remote or hybrid working propositions allows you to say, what could that look like elsewhere, but not necessarily have to relocate in those spaces. We've got a very good friend of mine, as an anecdote, works in an organization where they've got what they call virtual expats. So you can work from anywhere. They've had to create the right infrastructure. They had to create the right policies and procedures to enable it, but they have, as a consequence, being able to actually say to their staff, this is what's on offer, but this is how it works, because you can't have everyone do the same thing, has been quite key in terms of the training, the awareness, the line manager, and the individual's responsibility. So I do think it's about also, if you've got a mentor or a sponsor, to soundboard this. Sometimes we're not sure from a career perspective what the next move would be. And often we're either too nervous to ask, or we think that that level of vulnerability may not be seen to be appropriate because we're a high flyer, or we really are good at our job, we seem to be talented, we should know, etc., what's next, or we are that good, people like us in the role that we're in, we're a very solid or strong performer. And I think the courageous conversations here are important. I feel like there's nowhere to go in the vertical. what are the options? And we're often surprised by what is available from an optionality perspective. So maybe it's a horizontal move with greater depth. And if it's horizontal in terms of the same level, but greater depth, that'll set you up for a next move that could either leapfrog or be your diagonal. And so for me, I really want to encourage you to have conversations. And even if they're not in your organization, Amrinder and the team here, and Neha and Doreen and I, you've been connected to a broader network, is to almost lean into that network, paint a picture for where you are in your career, and actually ask for help. I think we do it so readily for others to a large extent. We don't necessarily do it enough for ourselves. Organizations have boards that they soundboard great ideas with. As individuals, you should have a board of relevant individuals that help shape some of your thinking. And that's where the technology is useful, the individual experience is useful, and the opportunity to lean into a broader network is quite key.
It's so fascinating to hear both of you, and sometimes I feel that, you know, for such a rich panel, we just need, Neha, I think we just need 90 minutes for a webinar to hear all the insights that we have. But I think our time today is limited, so today we'll try to bring this webinar to close here. Neha, if you have any closing remarks, and if you can tell them where they'll receive the slides, etc. But thank you so much for this opportunity here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, because I've enjoyed every bit of it, and it was pretty insightful. It helped me actually, first of all. Obviously done to the attendees, but first of all to me. It was one great experience to share the platform with all of you. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
to meet you.
Bye. Have a good one,
Same
everyone.
here. Bye-bye.
The slides and everything in the email, so just watch out for those emails from Neha. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
I'll send all the
Thank you.
information.
Have a great day.
Bye, all.
Bye-bye.